then. Hi guys, welcome to my next video. As you can see today, I have a guest. I have Mr. David Beattie with me today. He's a very well-renowned property entrepreneur himself. He's the co-founder and CEO of Chorus Property Group, as well as the author of a book that has assisted me in my short journey so far as a property entrepreneur, the expert landlord. Welcome, David, and thank you again for joining me today.
It's awesome to be with you. Thanks for inviting me.
Cool stuff. So I think the first question that I'll go to is, could you please just tell us a bit more about yourself and what is it that got you involved into property? What drives you and what pushes you to stay in this business that sometimes is a bit difficult?
Okay. Well, first and foremost, I'm a husband of my beautiful wife, Karen, and I've got three beautiful girls, age 9, well, not 10, 11, 12. And I presently live in Joburg. I lived in Cape Town most of my life, and we came up to Joburg 7.5 years ago. About 99, 2000, I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and I became fascinated with the idea of building assets, net assets, as Rich Dad, as Robert Kiyosaki talks about. And so my brother actually said something to me. He was renting a property. He said, why don't you buy a property and rent it out? And so I did. In about 99, I bought my first rental property in Observatory in Cape Town. There's some complete stuff up in many ways, as we shared prior to this call, and it's the best way of learning. And but then I learned a lot from that. And then I bought a little commercial property. And then when I met my wife and married my wife in 2005, we then bought another 5 or 6 or 7 properties. And that kind of got me on the journey to really explore the property space. Most of my experience over the last 15 years, 20 years has actually been in property services and specifically rental management. So in 2002, 2003, I started renting out contacts, part-time, renting out people I knew their properties. So I did that part-time for 18 months while I was still working at my dad's company. I then left that and then went full-time into rentals and sales and residential in Cape Town. And fortunately, I married my wife in 2005 and she was earning an income, and so we could buy the properties of her income. I'm fascinated about building assets. So for me, there's two sides of it. There's the income, and then there's the building the actual asset base as well, of which obviously future income can come. Okay. But the present income today is what keeps me running today and us running today. And the asset is what builds the long-term wealth.
Could you maybe just elaborate a bit more? What do you mean exactly when you say building the income and the assets itself? What was the difference, and I guess what is the benefits of either or?
Okay, so I've known some property investors that didn't earn much money for about 5 years. They worked part-time jobs and so forth, but were full-time property investors. They didn't earn any money for many, many years. But what they did do is build hundreds of millions rands of assets. Now, obviously, that may be another call that we have to go through and how they did that. But by leveraging other people's money and them spending the time and effort, the properties like that don't necessarily give you net income in the beginning, because you've got to get borrowings, which are costs, and you've got to pay off your bond and so forth. Yeah. But you're building an asset, which in 5 or 10 years, when the gap between the expenses and the income grows, you start getting an income from that asset base. Okay. In the short term, however, you're not getting a lot of income. Many other people, for example, have very well-paying jobs. They might be earning good money, but they're not building. But if they stop working the next day or the next month, they're going to stop earning the income. Then they're in trouble unless they've got savings and so forth. So you need the incomes to keep you surviving today. But if one wants to retire or slow down, then one needs a sense of a passive income. Okay. And passive income is going to come from assets. Okay. I don't know whether that just explained Rich Dad, Poor Dad in probably not too well in about 30 seconds.
Okay, so if I'm understanding you correctly, let's say, for example, someone who has a job right now, they use their income to purchase assets so that in the future they can receive a passive income.
That's correct. And that's what, talking about my story, I was earning well in my dad in 99, 2000. I was a sales director and I was earning fairly well at that time. And then I managed to buy the 2 property assets that I then could buy because of my incomes. I learned a lot about managing. When I went full-time into the property business, the estate agency, I didn't earn much income for the next 3 years. The only way I survived was by selling those 2 property assets, and I used the cash flow from those property assets, or the asset growth from those property assets, to then pay for my daily expenses. Of course, that eventually runs out.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I married my wife who had some property assets. And she's still married to me because she wants the return on those assets. But I mean, that's an illustration about, I mean, when I met her, the bond on her property was 200,000. When we sold the property 18 months later, there was a 1 million rand bond on that property. So I used 800,000 rand for our business, our personal expenses, and for building the estate agency. Obviously, eventually that gets into trouble if you're not building your own business or your own income quick enough, and eventually you need to start selling assets to pay for that income. But that's just an illustration of how it worked for me personally.
Okay, I see. So then on that note on income, right? Is it possible for someone who maybe doesn't have a lot of income to purchase property, to get involved in the property business, considering that obviously in our country, we have a lot of individuals who might not qualify for a home loan and so forth?
That's a very good question. And the answer is definitely yes. The working out of that answer is a bit of a challenge. So I would suggest we remember the word value add. The word value add. Now in business is all about you get the return on the value that you add to others, right? So we've got to work out, I don't have any money, but what do I have? Maybe I have a great attitude. Maybe I have a little bit of spare time. Often if I'm younger, I have energy, which older guys have less of. So I say, okay, so I've got energy, I've got time. I'm not going to stuff around and have parties. I'm going to spend my weekends serving and adding value. Okay, now who needs that value? Some guys who are wealthy, guys and girls who are wealthy, don't have time. Some of them don't have energy. Some of them have other priorities, but they got money. So what value add can I provide to them with my time and energy, which is valuable to them, and I get the benefit of leveraging their money. So it's a combination of the different mix in the pot. Obviously the challenge, of course, is that one has to grow personally. One has to grow personally with skills. There's a couple of areas that I believe one has to grow. Number one is skills. If I'm going to take on if I want to go for heart surgery, I'm not going to necessarily only go for the heart surgeon that's very enthusiastic. I want to know that heart surgeon has competence. So am I building my knowledge around property investing? And I mean, you've spoken about the journey, and I mean, there's plenty of organizations that provide that kind of expertise and support. Number two is, am I growing my character? There needs to be a sense of trust. If someone with money is going to partner with me, they need to be able to trust me. They need to know that I'm going to be reliable and loyal to them, that I'm going to be trustworthy of their money. That's super important. And also, am I growing in self-esteem? A lot of, and this is a pity, not to be too off the line, but I think one of the tragedies of apartheid is the fact that there's lack of confidence in our population, and which is a great tragedy because there are so many competent guys and girls out there that actually, if they had more confidence, would actually do exceptionally well. So the three areas of self-development would be skills, character. The skills is going to get you in the game and provide value with your time and energy. Your character is going to keep you in the game, and your self-esteem and confidence is also going to help get you into the game and help you. Sometimes you got to act confident without, in fact, knowing your stuff as yet. You got to walk confidently. That gives confidence to your fellow investors and to your other colleagues in the industry. So, and then the last thing I would say in this area is building a network. So you need, if I work out what my assets is, which is maybe time and money, sorry, time and energy. I've got the self-discipline to act on that. Building a network slowly but surely is super important, because now I can find different people to add value to. And also those people can also refer me to other people that can tell me like attracts like. So typically a wealthy young guy typically knows other wealthy young guys or old guys. And if that wealthy old guy or girl trusts you and receives your value, that wealthy old guy or girl will definitely refer you to their friends too. So building a network, I think, is super important. And I think that's one of the challenges of transformation in this country, in that the previously disadvantaged folk don't have that network as yet. And I would think it's a very high priority to develop.
Interesting that you'd actually...
That answers your question?
It actually does. It does very well. Thanks. So then also on that, like, leeching off that then, in terms of finding a property investment, what would you say is a good investment? What's a bad investment? How do I, as a first-time buyer looking to become a property investor and have this million rand asset base, how do I figure out, is this a good asset for me or is it not?
Okay, it's a good question. The first answer to that question is actually a funny one, in that any property in any area can be a good investment. So I would suggest, I've got landlords that are particularly only focused in the affordable housing section, sector of the market. I've got landlords that focus on the middle upper market section of the property market. Some landlords are doing exceptionally well in Cape Town. Other landlords won't even touch Cape Town, and they only do really well in Joburg. So it comes down to what is I would suggest there's a couple of factors. Number one is, where is my area of expertise? It's no point if I'm an expert in Joburg to start, it's not necessarily a good thing. I hear of a kind of a good deal in Port Elizabeth or East London. I must really start, where is my level of expertise? It's generally my neighborhood, or where I come from, for example. Those are, I would suggest, that the landlords that have focused on the areas that they're good at are doing well in those areas. So I would suggest in the beginning is to kind of have a very broad shotgun approach and investigate all areas, but over a period of time, start focusing on a niche. I've got some landlords, for example, that are only in the Santon Porzov kind of area. They've got 2-bedroom apartments around about the 7,000 to 10,000 rand mark. For them, it works. It works for him in his investment focus. And I think he'll do well. I've got other landlords that think that's crazy. That's just not where they're going. So it really comes down to, where's your knowledge and where's your expertise. When it comes to choosing the actual asset in my area of expertise, the numbers must work. As Dolph de Roos says, you look at 100 properties, you put offers in them 3 and you get 1. So look for the right numbers, know what your figures are, and don't just buy any properties, but really search well for the numbers. In this market, I don't want to give investment advice per se, but I would suggest that cash flow is more important than asset growth at the moment, and I would choose cash flow rather than asset growth. And if you're not getting positive cash flow, then I would recommend to move on to the next opportunity.
So basically, understanding your niche, understanding the area in which you want to invest in is very important, and ultimately making sure that you have a cash flow, that your cash flow positive, because I guess at the end of the day, you can't really predict the future. We don't know what's going to happen, especially in South Africa, in this economic climate that we live in, this political uncertainty and everything.
No, I think, look, I mean, this environment I'm quite cynical about. I think there's amazing opportunities, but in the past, we used to do investments saying there's probably going to be an upside on this investment. If we make an investment decision saying, what if there's no upside? Will this investment still work? And that's what I'm saying to landlords now. There are opportunities in that segment, definitely, but don't hinge your investment on the fact that things are going to get better. I mean, we hope they might get better, and we're all working hard to make it better, but I wouldn't hinge my investment on that.
Okay, I see. All right. So don't speculate, basically.
I would think I would think there's too many juicy elements, juicy opportunities elsewhere to have to speculate.
Okay. All right then. And then once now, let's say this first time buyers now purchased their first property, right? Would you recommend that I use an agent to manage the property because they know what they're doing, they're experienced, or would you suggest that I manage it myself, maybe to gain the experience myself?
Look, the answer is really it depends. I would say first prize is to manage it yourself. And that is generally a messy and a little bit more expensive exercise than spending money on an agent.
Okay.
But I mean, I learned so much managing my own property. I mean, I got an estate agent to place a tenant in my first property and complete stuff up. I mean, the tenant was a drug addict. I couldn't get rid of him. He made a complete stuff up on my property. I don't know why I had a sofa in my property and he used it as a Rano. And it's like but if I hadn't, it's like, and I mean, and I don't know, he didn't know where the toilet was. So the whole bathroom was, yeah, let me not say anything more than that. It was just complete stuff up. But if I hadn't been involved myself, I would never have learned. And now since then, we've managed thousands of properties over the last 18 years. And because of that first experience that I kind of know what I'm forced to know what I'm doing. So I think first prize is to manage it yourself. However, if you're super busy in, let's say like I'm a CA and I'm working 15 hours a day, then it's best to outsource. Because the opportunity cost, you're not going to really learn anything because you're so busy and because you're going to, not spend the time on it to give it expertise, then rather outsource it and learn over a period of time. If you've got a bit of time and a lot of, then I would say the first prize is to manage yourself. And this is coming from a rental agent who loves new business. So I think it's best to try and do it yourself. But if the property happens to be located in a town 2 hours away, then don't manage it yourself. That's going to be a mess. One of the benefits of managing it yourself means that as your portfolio grows, and this happens time and time again, is that landlords have less capacity to handle all their portfolio. I've got one landlord who spoke to me recently. He's got 40 units around Joburg. 40. She's amazing. She's done amazingly well. I cannot believe. I'm like so impressed. He's now getting to a stage where it's a bit tough to manage it. I've got landlords at 5 units and say it's too much to manage. But the thing is that I can now deal with those landlords intelligently because I can't pull the wool over their eyes. They know what it is to manage units. They know what it is to measure, and they know what to measure stuff. They know what it is to go and look out for tenants and so forth. They're a lot more realistic, and they can also be more demanding in specifics because they know what it is to do the rental management and tenant placement.
So basically, if you've done it yourself in a way, it gives you that experience and the knowledge also on your next property. And then once maybe you feel like it's getting a bit too much, then maybe get a rental agent to assist you. Or if you are, as you mentioned, a very busy person, rather just get an agent from the beginning, because it's going to be a waste of an investment if you have a tenant who has queries and complaints and you can't really attend to it.
So the answer in the long term is opportunity cost. If I manage these properties myself because I've got a bit of time, let's say I've got a portfolio of 5 units and I manage it myself, let's say it's always going to cost one something. If I've got spare time and energy, I can manage it myself because it cash flow wise is cheaper. If managing myself is stopping me buying 2 more properties, the opportunity cost, even though I might save cash flow in the short term, the asset growth in the long term, which I'm missing out on by spending too much time on my property management, it's an opportunity cost for me not to grow my portfolio. And that is a different cost, which may be way higher. So you kind of got it on a horses for courses from like an annual basis. Let's say in your portfolio, you got a new job opportunity in Cape Town and now you were relocating and you got 3 properties left in Johannesburg, for example. Let's say that's your portfolio. You would probably want to outsource your properties because the amount of income that you're probably going to lose and the fact that you're not going to be able to focus on a new opportunity in Cape Town, for example, may be too high a cost. So it's sometimes also determined by one's personal circumstances, which can change over time. Okay. It's a business decision. It's not necessarily one right answer.
Yeah. Okay. And then heading towards that, actually, your book, The Expert Landlord, you mentioned the importance of screening tenants. And I think it's something we've seen a lot as landlords where the lack of screening a tenant has resulted in a bad tenant, which is, I think if I'm not mistaken, you say that you'd rather have no tenant than have a bad tenant. So could you maybe just elaborate a bit more on the importance of screening a tenant? And if I am managing this property myself, how can I screen it? Like, how can I best go about it? Because maybe I don't have the necessary tools that an agent might have.
Okay. So the number one need of a landlord is cash flow.
Yes.
That's pretty obvious. I mean, and I think that we all think about that. The way you're going to get cash flow is through occupancy, having your property occupied. Let's say hopefully 12 months out of 12 months in a year. Second of all, the way you're going to maximize your cash flow is by actually collecting the rent from the tenant that's occupying your property. A quality tenant is going to have a much higher chance of paying your rent on an ongoing basis. And what we want as a landlord is that you want your rent to come in on the first of the month in full, consistently every month. And a quality tenant is what's going to give you that. And the way to get a quality tenant is by screening those tenants carefully. You've got to look at their past history and so forth. If you go to the expertlandlord.com website, there are some free systems and so forth that one can download. And one of those is a process flow, which explains, it's in the book as well, as to how to screen a tenant. Yeah. And it's really a simple process that one goes through. And then it also speaks of using a tool like TP and the Tenant Profile Network. So if you use that tool and that process flow, then you've got a very good chance of finding a really good tenant.
But then, you know what I found difficult sometimes? How do you, maybe what advice would you give to someone who's gone through a process of finding a good tenant, and they were a good tenant, or everything seemed as if they were a great tenant at the beginning, and then over time you realize that actually this is not a great tenant. Maybe you realize it on inspection of the property after a few months of them moving in, or maybe you realize that they pay you, instead of on the 1st of every month, they pay on the 7th, they pay on the 6th, they pay on the 10th, they late pay. And like, what advice would you give to someone who's currently in a situation where they believe their tenant is a bad one?
Okay, great. So the first answer to the question doesn't really answer directly. It's the answer, I'm going to get you answering it correctly now. The first answer to this is prevention is better than cure. And 9 times out of 10, through proper tenant vetting, one places a quality tenant. So what you're saying as an illustration, as an example, happens more often than not because of poor tenant selection. Okay, so like I like hearing the eviction stories around the fireplace, you know, the braai, but most of those come because of bad management. I mean, they make great stories, but you know, we in our business manage thousands of rentals. We have very, very, very few evictions because we place tenants. So that's the first thing. But if it does happen, and it does happen, especially through the recent COVID times, tenants have lost jobs, really good people have lost jobs and so forth. The first thing I would say is to be proactive. And that comes through good management. In other words, I don't want to be reacting 3 months after the tenant started acting badly. I want to be giving breach to that tenant, breach notice to that tenant from the beginning. So prior to that, another reason why tenants become delinquent tenants is because we're not managing them correctly. We're not proactive in, for example, a tenant says, I'm not going to pay rent because you haven't fixed up the geyser, for example, or, you know, this maintenance hasn't been done. Yeah. So that's the second reason, non-tenant payment, and then also not looking after the tenant well professionally enough. So I'm actually pointing the finger back at the landlord to say, okay, prevention is better than cure. Let's stop this problem happening in the beginning, because when it does happen, it's a little more challenging than it should be because of the legislation that we're operating in. Yeah. Okay, so we've selected the tenant well, we're looking after the tenant well, we've done all the maintenance, and not silly maintenance, I'm talking about reasonable maintenance, which is professional service as a landlord. Then it depends on the breach. If the tenant has been acting badly, or, you know, then that's a different breach than we're giving if they haven't paid their rent. So if they've been acting badly, or there are lots of complaints from the neighbors, or otherwise they're messing up your property, then I would give notice to rectify that breach. In other words, they must stop making noise, and if it happens again, you're going to give notice to vacate. And similar to, they must fix up these damages, and if they don't do it within X date, you're going to give the notice to vacate. So you'll deal it with that perspective. And then from a rent management, rent collection perspective, I would be setting out, making sure from day one that one is showing a strictness with rent collection. Sometimes a tenant is paying on the 7th of the month because they think they can get away with it. If from month one they start to pay the 2nd, 3rd of the month, I'm already on the case. So on the 2nd of the month, I'm already SMSing them if the money's on my bank account by the 1st. By the 4th of the month, I'm already sending a letter of demand. So if one keeps these strict procedures in place, then there's less and less chance of a tenant not paying the rent on time and in full. So when a tenant does not pay the rent, or is to send them notice of breach, and in 20 working days later, you can give them notice to vacate if they haven't rectified that breach, which is a non-payment of rent. There again, typically I would be liaising with the tenant in between, negotiating. And if the tenant, a lot of it's a case-by-case scenario. If the tenant has just happened to lost a job for a month and they're getting a job back again, well, then you can do a payment arrangement that they can pay back their arrears. If the tenant has just been errant and a naughty person, well, you've got to start negotiating them to vacate the property. I would say most of the time one should get a tenant to vacate through negotiation. Once in the blue moon, very, very seldom, one should then get legal. I would go legal sooner rather than later if the negotiations are going nowhere. Even though the eviction is quite expensive, it's still cheaper than losing 6 months of rent.
Yeah. Interesting, very interesting. So ultimately, as a landlord, it's your responsibility, it's your investment, and it's your responsibility to take care of it, to ensure that you are receiving your rentals on time and you follow due process, if not. All right.
Yeah, I mean, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Kiyosaki talks about a passive investment. That's the one area I slightly disagree with him on, in that a property investment can be a passive investment if you've got good business systems in place. But a property that you bought is a huge investment, 500,000, 1 million rand, 2 million rand, whatever. That's a business asset that you're looking after. And you've got to have the right systems and tools to make sure that you're getting the performance areas. And then you're managing those lack of performance where there's lack of performance. But it doesn't just fall in your lap, unfortunately.
True. So then lastly, I guess my last question for today is directly at you as an individual. Do you think that if you took another path, what path would it be? And do you think that it would have been as successful as you are today? You've written a book, you're an author, many thousands of people I'm sure have bought your book to date. Do you think you'd still have the same success? And if so, which path would you have considered taking, if not property?
Okay, so it depends how we define our success. At the moment, I feel I'm incredibly successful, not because of any money I do or don't have. It's because I've hit the lotto with my wife, and I've got 3 beautiful kids. I've got health. We've got opportunities and so forth. So I'm successful in that perspective. And my wife has agreed that even if we lose everything, she'll still be with me. So I'm very happy from that perspective. But it's worth the effort. From an income perspective, I think because of the opportunities I grew up in, and I'm not, I just want to honor and respect the fact of my privilege that I've come up in. I think I would have still been working at my dad's company, and my income levels would be great. And building on the opportunities I was given, and not everyone has been blessed with that. So I want to honor that and make sure that any success I have isn't just because I've worked hard. It's also because I won the genetic lottery. But I think my incomes will be similar. But also, obviously, there's been huge work, and income-wise, there's been some of my peers or some of my brothers that wouldn't have had the same success in my dad's business because they weren't taking the opportunities as much as I did. So I like to say I'm standing on the shoulders of those that come before me, and I've worked really hard, sacrificed a hang of a lot, and I'm still trying to make it work. So I don't believe I'm successful as yet, although many people may have had a little bit of an idea of success. The only reason I would say I'm successful is because my family is most important. And I think from an asset perspective, an asset wealth perspective, the asset that the money I've made in property from a wealth perspective is really in my company, Chorus Property Group. So properties wise, we sold everything in 2008 in the property when the property went south. And I think it's kind of challenging to be a full-time property investor and a full-time property owner. It can be done, but I think it's a particular challenge. And what I've chosen to do over the last 10 years is to spend most of my time and money in building the company asset, which has got some value now after many, many years. Not a lot, but it's got some value. And that's where most of my present wealth is. Property investment for me, and this is very different for everyone, by the way. I've got some landlords that are full-time landlords and they become very wealthy from that perspective. There are many business owners that are wealthy because of their business and yet have properties as assets which they buy from the success of their business assets. And I think that's probably the path I'm following in the future, in that property assets to me is really a defensive measure. So as opposed to saying, looking for the good little deal down the road where I'm going to make a lot of profit on cash flow, the property assets I'm more than likely invest in the future are going to be more passive from the point of view that they shouldn't take a lot of my time because most of my asset growth is actually in the business asset. Of course, property has enabled that for me to happen. I'm in the industry, property industry. What I am doing at the moment, for example, I've got a little bit more capacity. So we're looking at a little development in Westdean. And I do think standing on the shoulders of the opportunities that Chorus Property Group has given me, I now have a little bit more capacity to start building development assets and so forth. So I think that's where a lot of my future wealth will come from. And obviously it depends how quickly Chorus Property Group grows as well. So yeah, I think property, I think in the long term, property is going to be the answer to long-term wealth. It is to many folk. But you know, I think one needs to look at it and not put pressure. If I'm a really high paid engineer at the moment, I think the secret is to leverage that income to live as cheaply as possible. I mean, when I met my wife 16 years ago, I had holes in the back of my pants because there were so many springs coming through the seats of my car. My feet used to get wet in the Cape Town winter. You know, because every single cent I owned was going into the business or to the property assets. And I think if one has that approach, I think in the long term, the property asset or the business asset or both will start bearing fruit in the years to come. But nothing is certain, hey? Unfortunately, as entrepreneurs, there's ups and downs. I think building my present success on is the property asset growth I got in the early 2000s that enabled Chorus to survive and thrive in the early days. Mm-hmm. And even though I don't have the property assets now, the asset growth in those early days, and we can say property, is what enabled the growth of Chorus today. So I think it's a multifaceted thing, but I think as an asset class, property, yeah, one can't go wrong. Yeah. But the easy days are over, and I think one still needs to build competence in that area. And I think, not to overcomplicate it, but there's many facets of property. For example, you could go into property services. So I'm getting pretty much an annuity income from managing rentals and doing sexual title management. That's pretty much monthly income. I don't get as rich as the guys that sell one property in Sandton, but I get my income every month. That's pretty cool. It's not a property. I make money from other people's assets, and that's making an opportunity in property. I think that's also speaks to my strengths. I'm not the world's best deal maker. I've just realized it, but I'm a very strong systems person that builds framework and builds a framework of systems and so forth. And that speaks to, this is why I'm in residential property management. So also understand one's own needs. There's not one answer in property. And we know landlords that are making a lot of money on flipping. And that's all they do because they're great deal makers and they love the deal. And I know other properties, other landlords that are making money that never sell a property. Maybe they should actually, but they don't because that's not their strategy. Yes. So there's lots of different ways of making money in property. It doesn't necessarily have to be owning a property. And it doesn't have to be owning a property yourself. You could be a small percentage shareholder in a larger portfolio, for example, and you just do all the work. I know one of my clients had no money and is now fairly wealthy in property because he does the maintenance of those 100 units or 200 units that he manages and owns, but he owns a 10 or 20% of those units.
Mm,
And he got equity in those properties by doing all the work up front.
mm.
And now he's got equity in it, and now he does the maintenance and so forth. So his assets aren't necessarily giving him a lot of money at the moment, although his asset is growing nicely. 10% of 200 properties is not a bad thing. But he's earning his daily money by doing the maintenance for the properties and so forth. So there's lots of different ways and journeys within property. Don't be limited by one thing. One can also become, for example, a portfolio manager for Growth Point. Great opportunity, you know. My sister-in-law is CEO of Liberty 2 Degrees. And, you know, she's CEO of a large listed fund. And I don't think she's doing too badly, for example. So there's lots of different ways.
As you mentioned, yeah. Okay, I see. Okay, all right. So then if someone wants to get a hold of you, maybe they're actually a landlord who's watching this video today, how can someone get hold of you, get hold of your services to understand maybe a bit more of the offerings that you could provide for them and the value you could provide for them?
It'll be my pleasure, and I'm not happy. I'm not only here to sell my services to people, but more importantly, I'm super happy just to dialogue with landlords. I love kind of discussing and debating and seeing what the individual situation is. My interest is helping people with the right answers for them. That right answer is sometimes using our services, but sometimes isn't, and I don't really mind either way. So I'm available. I'm not really big on Twitter and Instagram and stuff. I am on Facebook, David Beattie. But I'm available at david@chorusproperty.co.za, and people can feel free to WhatsApp me at 082-417-5366. So that's david@chorusproperty.co.za and 082-417-5366.
All right, thank you very much. Then I'm definitely going to leave your details as well in the comment section of this video. So if anyone does need to get a hold of David, just to have a friendly chat about being a landlord, maybe a new property buyer, need some advice, David, I'm sure, will be more than willing to answer to your emails or your WhatsApp texts. Anyway, thank you very much again, David, for joining me today. Thank you. And hopefully you'll take me out on a tour sometime on some of the rentals that you are managing. And I'm hoping to learn much more from you as I go upon my journey. See you guys in my next video. And thanks a lot for tuning in. And yeah, enjoy. Cheers.